Hey, it's Josh. This is the Josh Bloom Podcast. It is episode number 20. I cannot believe number 20, but it is number 20. This week, I am bringing you a very lengthy review of a film that is nominated for many Oscars called The Brutalist. I had not been to a movie in many, many months, but I managed to score a ticket at a slight discount, and I also knew that this movie was 3.5 hours long, so I was getting a lot of bang for the buck, and it's also a lot of review because of the film being so long. I did it as kind of a watch-along, so if you are a spoiler-phobic person who will see this movie or want to see this movie, I'm sorry, you're going to have to tune out for now, but come back after you see it and you can hear what I had to say about it. A few things. This film, like I said, is nominated for many Oscars, and I am excited to be releasing this podcast just ahead of this weekend's Oscars because I do have a prediction and a hope about a specific actor who is in this film, and you'll hear me talk about that. One thing I knew about the movie going into it, and the only thing I knew about the movie going into it, is that it was about an architect. And I never mentioned this in the review, and then I realized when I made a video for YouTube about this review, which I recommend you go and watch, because it is a come see a movie with me post. The entire review is within the post, but it's also about 10 minutes of me going to Pleasantville, New York to watch this, and there's a lot of content there that isn't in this episode of the podcast. And one of the things I talk about is I remember that when I grew up, the only architect I knew about was Mike Brady from the Brady Bunch. So this movie, as it turns out, I will spoil the fact, has nothing to do with Mike Brady, but it is about an architect. This part is true. The other thing I want to mention is that throughout this review, you will hear me use the main character's name, who happens to be, in addition to an architect, Hungarian. And I did my best. But I will tell you right now, I did not want to attempt to do the names of his wife and niece because, man, I'm just not gonna even attempt to embarrass myself to that level. But give me a break and understand I did my best with that. Well, that's enough of my yakking. Let's get to a review of The Brutalist, and I'll come back at the end if you make it and say goodbye. As far as films featuring cabinet construction, The Brutalist comes up short of 1987's Overboard. The rest is must-see cinema. As a despicable, demented rich dude, Guy Pearce deserves to grab Oscar Gold with his attention-commanding performance. Seen January 18th, 2025, at the Jacob Burns Film Center, Pleasantville, New York. The Brutalist is a better film than Overboard, the 1987 comedy starring Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn, that also features cabinet construction, and even though it clears that bar, I wanted to find The Brutalist more profound than I did. I left the theater unconvinced that I would discuss the movie 38 years later, like I am now with Overboard. Maybe it's my fault. During the ensuing days spent composing this piece, I accidentally saw some commentary and other criticism of the film that called out its insistence on being perceived as important. Was The Brutalist trying to get something across that I sensed but didn't have the faculties to succumb to? Maybe I'm not as sharp as I need to be to get the profundity the film tries to assert. I am okay with that, and none of this is to say I wasn't entertained. Enjoying a day at the movies is what's important. I also enjoyed the cabinetry. I am issuing the standard spoilers ahead warning here, but it is pointless because this entire piece is a spoiler. I wrote this review as a watch-along to give myself another chance to fully understand The Brutalist. Please abandon ship if you care about such things. I don't read anything about a movie I plan to see before I see it. In fact, I avoid even the most minor bits of information. That includes even looking too closely at a poster. I don't want to know anything. A couple of summers ago, My brother got upset because he wanted to discuss the actor Cillian Murphy with me a few days before I was about to see Oppenheimer, a film I had been waiting on for years. My brother wasn't happy when I said no, and he disrespectfully persisted, saying he just wanted to talk about Cillian Murphy and not the movie itself. When I said no, he got an attitude with me about it, and I didn't hear from him again for the rest of the year. I will write more about the meaning behind this in a forthcoming book. It's the type of familial disorder that will take book-length analysis to get to the bottom of. It's such an intense mess that I wouldn't even be bringing it up to illustrate my point about spoiler avoidance if I wasn't feeling so salty from listening to GNX by Kendrick Lamar as my soundtrack while doing it. I went into The Brutalist knowing one thing about the film. It's about an architect, and I am interested in architecture. I also love the architecture of film, which the story above about anticipating Oppenheimer should make clear. Unfortunately, before The Brutalist, I hadn't been to a movie in 9 months. I aim to purposely live a life of poverty as I transition from 30 full-time years in the music industry with my creative self on background into a full-time dream life as a writer and all of the artistic and creative strands and branches that grow from that trunk. Please help me by subscribing to my Substack, or you can buy me a coffee. Thanks. Like, follow, and comment if you care. Regardless, I deducted this movie ticket, the parking, and the gas on my taxes because this is work. Contrary to popular belief, this new lifestyle has brought extraordinary improvement to my existence. Through this new reality, I realized how much money I wasted on entertainment, convenience, and stupidity. These are lessons that I can take with me through the rest of my days no matter what happens, and this almost year of doing nothing but creating, finding, and developing my voice, and indulging my artistic impulses, has been fulfilling in a way I never could have imagined. I decided to take a break and see a movie. I wanted to see The Brutalist because I like architecture and because it would be good for my mental health to revisit the Jacob Burns Film Center after so much time away. I always feel comfortable and comforted there. Along with the benefits I described, the way of living that I have immersed myself in also bears fruit that is not sweet. Feelings of loneliness, self-doubt, and panic can emerge from taking a life risk like this. At the end of the day, it's all imaginary though, because living is a risk every day in every way. There is no stability, only the illusion and delusion of stability. This movie theater, where I used to spend a lot of time, see previous movie reviews and their accompanying videos from my mid to late 2023 run on my Substack, acts like an emotional balm when I am suffering the sore feelings that come from attempting to live a life that I believe is a mandatory stretch on the road towards the one that I will one day reflect on as better lived. Since you're reading this, you know I didn't sink into my seat and let myself be taken away by the movies like some pre-show Nicole Kidman commercial suggests. I took notes on every scene of The Brutalist. That's the in-the-dark scrawl from my notebook that's slow-motioning past if you're listening to me read this to you via my YouTube post of this piece. The Brutalist has been nominated for many Oscars, and I understand why this is an Oscar-nominated film. But I did not leave the Jacob Burns Film Center Theater with the buzz I left that very same room with after seeing There Will Be Blood, for example. In fact, I measure many movie theater experiences against that exhilarating afternoon when I said aloud to myself on the way back to my car, "There's your Best Actor winner right there." I love feeling that way. I love feeling blown away. I recommend The Brutalist. However, I am not effusive. Except about Guy Pearce. Guy Pearce has been delivering memorable performances for decades. I became a fan in 2000 with his role in Memento, another nod here to Christopher Nolan, and I am one of many who believe he probably should have already won for his role in 1997's LA Confidential, which he wasn't even nominated for. Pearce's performance in The Brutalist is what held my attention the most during a brutal, the correct word, frankly, nearly 4-hour running time, and his character is what I took away from the film and is what remains with me. It is unhinged and unpredictable. Adrien Brody is a fine actor, and I will put him in the same sort of pantheon as Daniel Day-Lewis, but only if asked. He is deserving of his Oscar nomination for The Brutalist. Brody owns his role, but does not own this film. Guy Pearce does. Now that you are sufficiently warmed up, let's get into The Brutalist. I'll talk more about the film's unique intermission later. Let's start at the beginning. As a Jew, with the username SuperJews, who sports a Jewish star in his bio even though he did not have a bar mitzvah, when I realized that this film wasn't just about architecture or an architect and actually has Holocaust content and implications, I knew I would have to pay attention or be blasphemous. I wrote extensively about the zone of interest previously, and Schindler's List had an enormous and lasting impact on my psyche and soul as a teenager. Even the comedic genius of the uproarious Nazi content in the original Mel Brooks film The Producers is fundamental to my sense of humor and personality. I knew that furrowing my brow about this Hebrew Revolution wrinkle in the story of The Brutalist meant I would need to watch the film through an intentionally Jewish lens, and my Jewish lenses are thick. Pre-show. Is Peter Cetera, the singer who made the band Chicago Mushy, a Jew? I don't think so, but hearing his ultra-light classic You're the Inspiration playing overhead as I entered the theater inspired my curiosity. Is this some Alamo Drafthouse-style pre-show that relates to the film? All I can surmise so far is that the architect's architecture might be inspired by whoever You're is. Is it related to the audience demographic? That the programming people at the Jacob Burns Film Center predict will be seeing this film and their musical preferences? And what does that say about me? Or is it a totally random playlist on repeat? Frankly, I have too much respect for the Jacob Burns Film Center to believe that. Today's first preview is the horror thriller Seed of the Sacred Fig, which is not in English. I can't write notes and read the screen simultaneously. Because of this, I can't say much, but I do like figs, especially when served as part of a cheese board. The following trailer is for I'm Still Here, and now I see that my notebook is upside down, which I have to fix, causing me to miss much of this preview as well. To make matters worse, it is also not in English. I am unable to juggle all of these issues that would not have surfaced if I hadn't been out of the movie-going game for so long. Suddenly, I remember that when I saw I'm Not Here on the theater's movie calendar, I mistook it for the other recent-ish Bob Dylan biopic, I'm Not There, and thought, sure, because of the Timmy movie, must be a double feature. I would have been interested in this, but alas. I have noticed that audiences in art house movie theaters belly laugh at jokes in movie trailers that I personally find barely worth a titter. This is not grumpy Gus talk, even if my preamble to this point suggests otherwise. It must have something to do with growing up listening to comedy albums and influences, Steve Martin, George Carlin, Richard Pryor, that essentially spoiled me to the wonders of the kind of light-hearted comedy enjoyed by fans of You're the Inspiration by Chicago. The trailer for Hard Truths is instantly moving, which is worth way more to me than a mild laugh anyway. I have been hearing immense praise for Marianne Jean-Baptiste in this film. Experiencing her work in this trailer alone reminds me of a similar feeling I had when I saw the early teaser for A Complete Unknown. In that early minute-long look, I knew that Timothée Chalamet would receive all of the accolades and awards he now accepts. I could tell precisely how rich his performance would be because of how rich it made me feel. I wrote at length about this phenomenon, also on Substack. I need to see Hard Truths. A commercial for a week of romance-themed films at the Burns does a solid job of seeing me. It is validating to see gay romance on the screen. Representation is meaningful. Brook Street Pictures presents The Brutalist. It is incredibly impressive to find out that a film with such an expansive visual scope was shot for shy of $10 million, primarily utilizing VistaVision, which most audiences will apparently never get to experience. According to film-tech.com, VistaVision was a 1950s format that ran sideways 35mm with 8 perfs, to get a more or less flat aspect ratio with more definition. It didn't last long as far as exhibition goes, still used for special effects, although probably not much these days. As a child, I climbed all the way up to the crown of the Statue of Liberty with my grandfather, seeing the statue upside down from the perspective of Laszlo Toth, played by Oscar nominee Adrien Brody, an architect. I knew it. And Holocaust survivor. I learned it. Arriving as an immigrant to Ellis Island is both an utterly compelling and unfortunately on-the-nose start to a film, considering America's current climate. Building boy gets with a prostitute before getting on a bus to Pennsylvania, leaving us with this film's How It Started promise of America. How it is going in the real world? Promises broken. I am a sucker for inventive opening credits. 7 comes to mind. The running from left to right poster style of The Brutalist, featuring all of the information that we typically expect from a closing credit sequence, is aesthetically pleasing. Part 1, 1947 to 1952. Laszlo learns in Pennsylvania that his wife, played by Oscar nominee Felicity Jones, and niece, who I thought was Laszlo's daughter up until the character's actual appearance, are still alive. Laszlo believed he had lost them forever in the escape, and in his reaction to the news, we see the makings of Brody's acting nominations. The veins on the side of his face bulge with authenticity. This is daughter, not niece-type relief. Laszlo begins making a living and also begins showing his roots in design by working in the custom furniture showroom of Miller & Sons, an Americanized last name taken by Laszlo's cousin Attila to hide his Jewish heritage. Is she a shiksa, Laszlo inquires of Attila's wife Audrey. Later, on a food line, Laszlo meets Gordon, a single father, and his young son William. When the food runs out before the group gets to the front, Laszlo promises to get there early and hold a place. A radio broadcast announces a call for the establishment of Israel, and Laszlo attends Jewish worship services. I feel pretty good about Laszlo at this point. I am not set adrift about his morality, even after the earlier dalliance with a prostitute. That's just the promise of America. Laszlo took her insult about his ugly face in stride, so I will ignore my growing feeling of foreboding for now. I continue to hope that The Brutalist will still prove itself to be a nearly 4-hour film about architecture when Laszlo discusses the creativity behind the current proliferation of tubular steel furniture. This is what I came here for. Laszlo practices his English by reciting Peter Pepper picked a peck of pickled peppers, a skill that unfortunately will not help him if he plans to see a lot of art house movie trailers. His talents and achievements as one of Europe's finest architects are soon to finally be recognized stateside. Arriving at the mansion of the absent Harrison Lee Van Buren, perfectly portrayed by Oscar nominee Guy Pearce, who I predict will get that gold, but I am not so sure that I will rule out coming back here to strike this sentence if he doesn't. Laszlo deftly renegotiates and doubles the $1,000 budget that Van Buren's kids, Harry Lee Van Buren, and ultra-creepy Joe Alwyn, and twin sister Maggie Van Buren, Stacy Martin, have set aside for a surprise remodel of Dad's library, up to $2,000. Finally, we are talking about woodworking. Don't get me wrong. I have been enjoying The Brutalist as entertainment and increasingly recognizing its brilliance, but I long for design content. It's who I am. I am suddenly brought out of the picture and reminded where I am when I hear an aggressive, "Stop talking!" from behind me, followed by the meek retort, "Geez," from a fellow patron. I take some comfort in the sustained pretension and privilege of the independent film center community. Never change, jerks. I begin to wonder if there is some sexual tension between Laszlo and Audrey, and then I start to wonder if Attila is trying to initiate a threesome when he encourages Laszlo and Audrey to dance. Then I begin to put together my own movie in my mind, as I remember an earlier conversation between Laszlo and Audrey in which she explains to him what a tricycle is. Hot stuff. As it turns out, I am projecting my own fantasies here and have only managed to give you too much information about the perv who is writing what you are reading. At least I have never commissioned the services of an escort like Leisure Suit Laszlo. My righteousness is restored, although Audrey's suggestion that Laszlo's work could earn him a better job leaves me feeling like she is trying to unload him from her life. I notice tension, but it is never addressed or resolved. Laszlo and Gordon have remained friends, and we see them together as work commences on Van Buren's library. More evidence that Laszlo is a good dude. I hope Gordon got a decent chunk of that fee Laszlo negotiated. A glass dome planned for installation on the roof crashes to the ground. My dim understanding of cinema says foreshadowing. Even if not, calling myself dim while describing the destruction of a light source conveyance is worth something. Van Buren's renovated library is breathtaking. The reveal of Laszlo's artistic and innovative automated shelving is an emotional high point that I have not heard much discussion of. The single sophisticated chaise lounge placed in the centered seating area and illuminated by natural light from above. I could have watched an hour of the logistics that went into replacing the destroyed dome. Is a dream. Marvelous. Laszlo's genius is confirmed. The scene reminds me of the 1987 film Overboard, starring Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn, in which Russell's handyman character builds an automated shoe cabinet for entitled heiress Hawn. Without the perspective of 38 years, I can't say for sure that Laszlo's cabinetry will leave as much of an impression on me as Russell's, but I thank the filmmakers behind The Brutalist for conjuring this memory. It has been a heartwarming pleasure. Harrison Lee Van Buren is not as impressed with Laszlo's work as I am. His expression of displeasure is our introduction to Guy Pearce as an instantly iconic character. Loudly combusting into his own home with detestable complaints about the Negro man working outside, Gordon, we are literally eating popcorn while watching Van Buren's over-the-top emotional freakout. It begins one of the weirdest, most uneasy on-screen relationships I have ever seen. It evokes that odd feeling of almost trusting someone and never getting there. Always almost. The renovation situation goes from bad to worse, as Laszlo is awakened that night by Attila to the news that Van Buren's creepy kid now refuses to pay for the work and is threatening to sue, saying that Laszlo damaged their property. Attila goes full garbage person. Instead of defending Laszlo, he accuses him of running his clients out the door, adding a cherry on top of the sundae of insults by claiming that Laszlo made a pass at his wife. Girl, we saw you encourage them to dance. Sit down. Other than hiring hookers, I thought of Laszlo as a pretty uncompromised guy whose ethics and life choices were pretty admirable when compared to my own. When considering the struggles, tragedies, and traumas he's endured, I figured we'd be wrapping this film up with a happy ending very soon. So dismayed was I to witness Laszlo now living in a hotel, with Gordon and son by his side, and the brief glimpse of a cigarette lighter in his shower stall. Just say no to heroin, Laszlo. Mr. Easy to Anger Van Buren is back, and I welcome Guy Pearce's return to the screen. I continue to be entertained, but now Pearce brings it up a notch. Watch. Oscar Gold, baby! I will strike these sentences if I have to. Van Buren is now suspiciously conciliatory after having sought out a now bearded Laszlo on a worksite. Over lunch, we discover that Laszlo's library, the same library that Van Buren lost his shit and threatened to sue over earlier, has since been featured in Look magazine. Ooh la la! Change of heart, anyone? Van Buren has gone from litigious enemy to parasocial frenemy, and we discover he's been doing the 1950s version of cyberstalking. Now that he knows that Laszlo studied at the Bauhaus, Van Buren begins metaphorically batting his eyelashes like a schoolgirl. Or schoolboy. I do not intend to regulate eyelash batting by gender. My notes say that Van Buren asks Laszlo, why is an accomplished foreign architect shoveling coal? I do not see this line in the film script, however. Perhaps it was inserted on set to further our perception of Van Buren buttering up Laszlo? It's a question, because as we will find out, the nefarious behavior of the rich and powerful is always accompanied by lathering victims with praise to make them feel vulnerable and pliable servants to the will of the villain. Nice world, huh? Sure, Laszlo is a sex-obsessed, prostitute-hiring heroin addict, but he is also a cabinet-constructing architect with heart. Van Buren is not, especially the hard part. To wit, Van Buren feeds his habits by inviting Laszlo to visit the library, as if to say, "Sure, come over so I can parade you around to my rich friends and pat myself on the back in the very room where I chastised you for no reason and subsequently made your life even more hellish than it already was when you met me." How gracious. Laszlo counters with his own evening of habit feeding by spending the night high at a porn theater. I was surprised enough by sex films projected in black and white to make a note of it, which feels like an absurd thing to me now, as the idea of the existence of porn theaters at all in the late 40s is what I am more surprised by. As Laszlo makes his way home, a car arrives to pick him up for the Van Buren visit. Who's the whore now? I see you, Van Buren. This is no little get-together. Laszlo is dropped into a fancy society affair and treated like a toy. While we learn that Laszlo was forcibly separated from his wife and niece because of his wife's poor health, we see the Van Buren twins exchange what I pick up on as odd glances that started me thinking they might be in some kind of incestuous relationship. I am sick, and this film is sicker. You will not blame me. Van Buren continues to seduce his crush. It turns out that his lawyer is also the lawyer for the vice president and is willing to help bring Laszlo's wife and niece to America. Van Buren deepens our knowledge of his character flaws by telling a story about offering his grandparents $25,000, worth $90 trillion in today's money, to leave his mother alone. Sociopathically seeking to see how they would react, Van Buren adds that he intentionally failed to sign the check. His grandparents were upset when they saw this, failing his test, and ultimately agreeing to a payment of only $500. Still worth $72,000 today? My buildings were designed to endure such erosion, is Laszlo's response. What a poetic reply, gushes Van Buren. To Van Buren's inquiry into what inspired Laszlo to become a builder of buildings that would literally stand the test of time. I reacted the same way at this statement that comes at the conclusion of Laszlo's explanation of how his buildings survived the war. This profound political metaphor left me feeling just as relieved in understanding my own intellect as Laszlo seemed to feel earlier when hearing that his loved ones were still living. Man, that son of a Van Buren sure is creepy. I see you, Harry. This preamble leads to Van Buren offering Laszlo the opportunity to build a learning center to honor Van Buren's mother, which, considering the nature of what we have already learned about that relationship, should absolutely be taken on by a heroin addict. Were Laszlo's previous buildings made under the influence of smack? I think not. I would have been perfectly satisfied if Laszlo used the remainder of his days to collect a tidy profit after launching the business called Laszlo's Libraries. But I guess this movie has a couple more hours to go. Onward. The Monument to Mom has now grown to an $850,000 budget. No data on how much that is in today's money. We see cuts of Laszlo writing to his wife about the process of bringing her over, surveying the land for the structure, and the seeds of a new conflict with Van Buren's contractor Leslie. Wealthy sociopathic narcissists are always seeking to pit architects and contractors against one another. As the day to begin construction nears, Laszlo is questioned about his background and ethnicity by the community, when his planned presentation of a model of the structure turns into an unplanned presentation of his qualifications to construct it. Laszlo seems thrown. Heroin addicts are always high, and I do not recommend hiring heroin addicts to make presentations about multi-million-dollar monuments they are about to build, unless that's your thing. As construction commences, Laszlo's wife writes back with the required photos to secure her passage to America, and we hear a radio report touting Pennsylvania steel. Part 1 of The Brutalist ends. The built-in intermission feels like Broadway in the best way. Accompanied by an on-screen countdown and photograph of Laszlo's wedding day, it offers an opportunity to reflect rather than a respite from watching. It makes me feel like a participant in the story instead of only an observer. I hesitate to recommend using this concept where it isn't called for. Still, I wonder how Martin Scorsese would have incorporated the use of an immersive intermission like this into Killers of the Flower Moon. Part 2, 1953 to 1960. Why do Laszlo's wife and niece seem unenthused upon arriving in America and reuniting with Laszlo? I think I am projecting all over this film. If it were me, I might be torn between seeing them again and using my newfound freedom from persecution, or so it may seem, as an opportunity to start a new life. I suppose my morality exists somewhere between Laszlo and Van Buren's. Leslie is busy being a bad little contractor by showing Laszlo's plans to another architect to find costs to cut. If it were me, I would have just said, look, this dude's good, but how much of the budget is being eaten up by his smack habit? Maybe this dialogue ended up in the scrap file. Laszlo's wife is feeling insecure about being wheelchair-bound, and the non-existent sexual tension between them is notable. Laszlo isn't even touching her. Maybe my projections are coming into focus. Did Laszlo make a boo-boo by bringing them to America? And is there going to be a reveal that Laszlo's niece is actually his daughter, as I had suspected? The Brutalist is now teetering between a profound work of art and a profound work of soap opera. When Van Buren gives Laszlo's wife a ride into the city, I would swear he's flirting with her if I didn't already believe he is crushing on her hubby. Either way, any flirting by Van Buren is manipulation and manipulation only. The earlier dome destruction during the library build seems like some metaphorical foreshadowing. As we see Laszlo and Leslie continue to butt heads, leading up to a heated confrontation between Laszlo and the other architect Leslie consulted without Laszlo's knowledge or approval, I am patting myself on the back. Not literally. I don't want to disturb the patrons behind me who were shushing each other during the film's first half. Van Buren sides with Laszlo, while Van Buren's suspicious spawn of a son starts to complain that Laszlo's traumatized niece, who to this point has been largely mute, doesn't talk enough. "We will tolerate you," he seethes at Laszlo. I took a risk and made an audible hiss at the screen to no complaints from the row of rich people behind me. Speaking of rich people, scenes at the Van Buren estate remind me of 2023's horniest film Saltburn, when I see his entourage lounging around in their finery without a care in the world except for deciding who to take advantage of next. As little boy Van Buren arrives with Laszlo's niece, she seems to be fixing her sweater. Like father, like son, as we will find out soon enough. That's all I'm going to allude to about that. I said spoilers, so if you're still here, that's on you. But I will leave this film's most egregious scene from flowing through my fingertips. A freight train carrying materials to the job site suffers a catastrophic crash that literally derails the project, as Van Buren realizes that the crew in charge of the transport is his own. True to form, he goes into meltdown mode, bringing the entire project to a halt as we fade to black. "Sorry, Mom. No monument for you." "Promise you won't let them drive you mad," Laszlo's wife intones, when now, in 1958, we return to see Laszlo working at a design firm. Van Buren gets in touch to say that the project is back on, and so is Van Buren's obsession with Laszlo. The Brutalist. No promises kept. Laszlo's niece is now married and pregnant and announces that she will be leaving America for Jerusalem. America's promise doesn't appear too promising in her estimation either. We glimpse Laszlo's hidden works under the sink. Couldn't he have built a little storage box? Come on, man. In case we were wondering if Van Buren's racism extended beyond referring to Gordon as the Negro in his yard, the answer is yes. Van Buren calls Italians the spics of Europe upon arriving in the country to tour quarries with Laszlo. How cute that they are now vacationing together. The shots of the quarries are my favorites in the film. The stones are like milky pink clouds drifting slowly through the atmosphere of a heaven on earth. What a stunning contrast to the scenes that follow. After Van Buren spies Laszlo kissing a woman who is not his wife, he follows Laszlo outside to find him throwing up from either using or withdrawing. I am choosing not to describe what happens next, but feel free to assume it is awful and not out of character for Van Buren, considering the masks he has worn. Back in Doylestown, work progresses. I wonder if Van Buren restarted the construction just to have Laszlo around. The version of Laszlo he's got now is losing it on the job site. Laszlo fires Gordon, and later, in a digression that sadly starts to feel a little bit Lifetime movie to me, Laszlo and his wife engage in an overdramatic fight in the car that leaves me feeling lost, which is discouraging, as it took so much effort to get this far. I really did want this to be a film that focused on architecture. Laszlo's wife's physical condition continues to deteriorate, and either to help her or to quiet her, his ambivalence about the relationship seeming evident since the day of her arrival, Laszlo shoots her up from his under-the-sink stash, the good stuff. She overdoses. Was this Laszlo's intent? Surprisingly, Laszlo's wife survives and begs Laszlo to agree to return to Europe with her. My grandparents were from Poland, and sitting here today, the thought of returning to my homeland sounds pretty good to me. You were right. This place is rotten. The whole country is rotten, she says, nailing it and motivating a shocking and necessary last bit of business at the Van Buren mansion. Laszlo's wife arrives to a welcome that quickly turns into a brawl. Struggling to stand up from her wheelchair, she confronts Van Buren about what happened on the trip to Italy. She is dragged screaming from the room as Van Buren makes his escape. We do not see him again. Epilogue, 1980. We wrap The Brutalist in what feels like a forced, too tidy fashion in 1980, with an epilogue featuring an aged Laszlo. Some controversy has been levied at the use of AI in the film to enhance the portrayal of hard-to-replicate Hungarian accents, which I think is a common-sense use of AI. But no one says anything anymore about questionable aging and de-aging, be it practical or impractical. The Irishman seems so long ago. Laszlo's niece praises her uncle, in a speech honoring him at the first architecture biennial. It is the destination, not the journey, she concludes. Bummer. Concluding the film with a cliché further confirms my personal conclusion that the final third of The Brutalist is the red-headed stepchild of the film. The promise of America really is in the beauty, functionality, and subtle sophistication of Laszlo's library. It provided an environment to escape the evils of America into fantasy and fiction. It provided Van Buren with an opportunity to escape his traumatic temper. Where The Brutalist most left me empty in relation to its ambition to make me feel full is in the fact that I watched it in January 2025, a time in American history that is fraught with hopelessness in the face of uncertainty for many, many people. It evokes a response of, correct, there is no promise here. You might as well have stayed in Europe, bro. Kurt Russell's shoe storage solution in Overboard unintentionally sets a more hopeful tone in comparison. In desperate times, it is comedy I crave because absurdity saves. Director Brady Corbett and his wife and screenwriting partner Mona Fastvold couldn't possibly know what Americans would be feeling when The Brutalist reached theaters when they were writing it, and why would it change the story they were trying to tell anyway. Still, mood carries as much of a message, or maybe even more than medium. And despite screening The Brutalist in the comfort of an art house movie theater, in a town where the average price of a home hovers around $1 million, I left feeling the lie behind the promise on that cold January day. Hey, it's Josh. You made it. You made it through the entire review of The Brutalist. I made it through the entire film myself, and as you could hear, it was an enjoyable experience. I had a good time. Thank you for listening to this. Next week, we will be back with more of 1,461 Days of Ignoring the Trump Administration. There will be part 2 of I Snuck in 10 Munchkins, and of course, many, many episodes of the Josh Bloom podcast to come. Thank you for listening, and please go to superjews.com. That is superjews.com to follow me everywhere and like, comment, and subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends about it. I know you might say, Josh, no one knows who you are. I'm going to tell my friend, listen to Josh Bloom. Yes, that is exactly what you're going to do. Thank you, and see you next week.